And at the end, we're going to have a survey, and please fill out the surveys. Give us some information back. I mean, by the time this is finished at the conclusion of today, we will actually start planning for next year again, as soon as next week. It's pretty challenging to try to get the schedule for the Salt Palace and the governor's agenda to actually line up. So a lot of it is looking out into 2016 and figuring out when we can do that. So with that, I guess I want to introduce our keynote speaker, Chris Warner. As I mentioned, I actually met him about a year ago. I saw him give a presentation. He's a pretty high energy guy. And even more so for me, I mean, certainly I enjoy climbing, and Chris is one of only 9 Americans, I believe it is, who has summited both Everest and K2. K2 may be the second tallest mountain in the world, but for anybody who's out there and follows climbing, it's far more difficult, and I believe it's something like 30% of the people who end up summiting end up not making it down the mountain. It's extremely dangerous. So let me just put a little bit here on Chris. He's also led more than 175 international mountaineering expeditions. He guided the first ever TV reality show on Everest. He's done a whole host of things for the History Channel, filmed an Emmy-nominated documentary about his K2 expedition for NBC. He also, I know, does oversee treks. I believe he has some climbing gyms. I mean, here's an entrepreneur and has a phenomenal message for us. With that, I guess I want to introduce Chris Warner. Thanks.
Thanks so much. What Brad didn't mention is that, like all of us, we have multiple aspects of our personality. So one aspect is a climber. One aspect is entrepreneur. I started my business with $592 about 20 years ago. We now serve over 750,000 people a year. We have 250 employees spread across 4 locations. And we are involved in the recreation business. We run indoor climbing gyms, expeditions. So, we know what you folks are going through. But the third part of the little Venn diagram that describes who I am is as a leadership educator. So I've been teaching leadership at the Wharton School of Business to MBA program participants since 2000. I work with a lot of Fortune 100 companies, everywhere from Google to, I'm trying to think who else I've been with the last couple of whiles, but I've worked with some NFL teams. I've worked with the Ravens. I'm working with the Texans this coming year. The people that generally hire me from a leadership perspective are teams that are either 99.9% excellent or they're about to fail. And on Thursday, I actually have to blow off my skiing day to go be with a $600 million company that feels like they're in the middle of an existential crisis. What got them to this point will not get to the next point, and if they don't change their team will not be successful. So I tell them the same story I'm going to tell you. So what I would like you to do, maybe differently from those groups who don't understand mountaineering or don't really understand the outdoors, is to think about 2 different things while I'm talking. First of all, think about what values do you demand of the teams that you work with. So like, what should your team really look like from a value perspective? And then secondly, for us, let's watch this from a perspective of what values does outdoor recreation bring to the workplace, to bring to other people's lives, and how is the values that we have in the United States about outdoor recreation different than we might see in other cultures? Because I think that's very important, especially as more and more folks come to Utah from outside the United States with a different set of outdoor values that they're going to try to place upon, our precious resources. So, let's go on a journey. This is a peak called Mount Everest. So besides Appa and myself, how many of you have climbed Mount Everest? It's a little bit surprising here because, there's now been 7,000 people to the top. And you've seen the television shows, you've read the articles, you see the gigantic, news splashes that seem to happen every single year up there. We do know that it's difficult, but it's not quite the same iconic place of adventure that it was when we were kids growing up, when we were all attracted to the outdoor world and fell in love with adventure and adventurers. And the reason we fell in love with Everest really was because of its iconic nature, right? It's the biggest mountain in the world. It happens to end in EST, like biggest, tallest, and toughest, and all those other things. Well, when people first went to Mount Everest, they were the success rate was horribly low. In fact, the first 10 expeditions that went to Mount Everest, every single one of those expeditions failed and 16 people were killed. In 1952, a Swiss team led by a guy named Tenzing Norgay on his 5th expedition to Mount Everest leads the Swiss climbers to within 600 feet of the summit. It's too late in the day to continue on. They're worried about their oxygen tanks, etc. They turn around 600 feet from the top and descend off the side of the mountain. The very next year, the British arrive in force. They studied, they did a debrief of what happened with the Swiss. I mean, clearly Swiss people are better climbers than British people, but they decided if we bring 50% more people with us, maybe we stand a better chance to get to the summit. And if we actually bring 50% more equipment to base camp, 50% more ropes, 50% more oxygen, we should be able to bring enough resources to be able to conquer this peak. And that's exactly what they did. The number one tool I think that they brought with them was Tenzing Norgay, now on his 6th expedition to Mount Everest. He knows the way from the bottom to within 600 feet of the top. He takes Edmund Hillary, and they both reach the summit on May 29th, 1953, the first success. They then handed their success over to the people in marketing. And the folks in marketing took this and spun it into the greatest, adventure of all time. There's books written about it, movies that were made, and some of us were influenced by those movies and those books, and we dreamt that someday we too could climb Mount Everest. It's part of that, American adventure, mystique that we all kind of grew up with. Well, when we look at how the Brits got to the summit of Mount Everest, we realize that they engineered their way to the summit. They brought with them 30,000 feet of rope. If there was an obstacle, they propped a ladder up against the vertical obstacle to get to the top. If there was a hole in the ground, like a crack formed by a crevasse, they built a bridge across that crevasse. In fact, they never really truly climbed Everest, but they climbed those ropes on Everest. They followed a rope from base camp all the way to the summit. And it's the same day when we guide Everest that we get people to the summit still today. We use infrastructure to get people to the top of Mount Everest. That method of getting people to the top, using tools to drive results, was also the method that businesses throughout the 40s and 50s and even into the 60s, that's how they drove results. They hired engineers to overcome all sorts of challenges. They made things cheaper, faster, smaller, etc., and they got the market share they wanted. Well, things changed for business and for climbing in the mid-1990s. This is an expedition, or actually 2 expeditions, trying to reach the top in 1996 on May 10th. You guys know this story? There's 2 competing commercial operators, an American CEO, a New Zealander CEO. They both thought that there was only room on Mount Everest for one commercial guide service. They wanted to be the one guide service that had complete control of the mountain. Competing against each other, they started to take chances or risks that you and I might not have taken. And the biggest risk they took was both rushing to the summit on the exact same day. So here it is, May 10th, 1996. We look at this picture, and what we see in the upper right-hand side is the top of a gigantic thundercloud that's been building. On the western or northern side of this mountain, there's a face called the Kangshung Face that's 10,000 feet tall. And this thundercloud is just forming in this kind of valley that's formed right there. And that thunderstorm engulfs the mountain by the end of the day. As a result of that, people are lost. People sit down and freeze to death. By the time the day is over, 10 people would be dead. By the time the week was over, 15 people would be dead. What do you think that did to their businesses? With some very powerful marketing, their businesses went through the roof. Both of those organizations are still in existence. This is kind of like the same thing if in Utah, if everybody went out by themselves, got their arms trapped by a rock, and then you guys passed out Swiss Army knives at the border. What it ended up doing was actually encouraging more people to come to Mount Everest. So instead of just shutting down business because of these highly publicized deaths, we actually had more demand than we could meet. And how are we going to handle this demand? Some of us had a little bit of an ethical dilemma, like is it safe or is it ethically righteous to bring people into an environment where they might die? Well, to try to make the deaths less likely, we decided that we needed to re-engineer the whole process. So we started to look at how do you die on Mount Everest? And you know what? There's 19 ways that people die on Mount Everest. And the top 4 reasons are all because of human error. In fact, if you looked at the statistics of mountaineering, the top 4 reasons across the board are human error-related things. People don't go to the mountains and are killed by the mountains. They go to the mountains and kill themselves on the mountains. This man is his name is Green Boots, right? He actually has a real name, but we all call him Green Boots. Green Boots died descending from the summit. So almost everybody who dies on Mount Everest dies coming down from the top. Except, in a rare year like this year where we had a gigantic avalanche. But your normal person sits down. If you guys been to like a football game or something and all of a sudden, like it's cold out and you can feel the cold coming up through your feet. You can feel your hands getting cold. Our hands and feet freeze long before our belly button does. In fact, there's a man called a waving man at 28,000 feet on the north side of Everest who sat down on a rock and he's still frozen in this position and he will stay this way for eternity. There's no bacteria up there so you don't rot, right? And so you turn a little bit bluer, maybe some wind comes by and wind scours you to erode you slowly over time. But everybody is, most people are just sitting there in eternity, slightly bluer than they were the day they died. They're like that bag of peas in the back of your freezer. You can take them out 20 years from now and make dinner with them, right? So if you look at these guys, as I said, they sit down. At 40 below zero, you freeze solid if you're unconscious in 6 hours. So their death tends to come pretty quick. As a guide on Everest, because I guided Everest 3 different seasons, you would hope that somebody who was struggling, that knew there was 19 ways to die, that saw a dead body in front of them, would run through this checklist and say, hey, there's a red flag. I better turn around and go back home. I've only had one person in my career on Everest turn around at summit day, and he was a lieutenant colonel in the Marines. Everybody else, no matter how bad they are, is so driven by reaching the goal that they're willing to step over the dead people, right? They're willing to see that they too might die because something's not going right and continue to move on towards the summit. So we realized that what we had to fight against was not just the altitude and the cold, etc. We had to fight against what's going on inside people's heads. So we took the tools that we had and we made them more available. We brought more oxygen. We got better radios. We actually got better weather forecasting systems. We put more ladders, more ropes, etc. in place. And we also spent more time trying to train the clients on how to have the right techniques that they can not only reach the summit, but get back down. We had this kind of cute idea that we thought maybe we'd get some repeat business if people didn't all die on us. Well, we then started to drive ridiculous numbers of people to the summit of Mount Everest. This is a picture of us on the top in 2001, 48 years after the first successful ascent. Somebody in this picture is the 2,000th person to reach the top of Mount Everest. In fact, on that day was the record summit day. 89 people reached the top. We were proud of our contribution to that 89 people, to that, whatever number got to the top. But this is the way the world portrayed the story that season. Look, it was a mess, and it was a mess up there. And it's not a mess because of things you probably are thinking about. Oxygen bottles, discarded tents, dead bodies, toilet paper, whatever it was. It really was a mess because the mountain had become so crowded that people were actually able to be anonymous up there. They no longer had a sense of responsibility to their fellow climbers, and so the behaviors that we started to see on the mountains were changing. We saw people stealing oxygen from each other, using each other's tents and sleeping bags and food, precious resources that had been carried up there that were critical to your survival. You would arrive in your tent and it would be occupied by a team of Spaniards or something, eating your cheese. So this was the kind of mess that they started to talk about on Mount Everest. Well, I spent 3 seasons guiding Mount Everest, and eventually I realized I had to go somewhere else to get the adventure that I wanted. What I was seeing up there was more and more people going to the top. You guys now know in a typical season on Everest, over 500 people will get to the summit. When a friend of mine took this picture, there's over 300 people in that line going towards the top. One of them is a 19-year-old British girl. Like, wouldn't it be cool to be the youngest British girl ever to be on the summit of Mount Everest? Well, she gets to the summit of Mount Everest. She's interviewed by the Herald Tribune or whatever the newspaper was in London, and they say to her, what was it like going to the summit? She goes, the only thing that was disappointing was having to step over a dying person to reach the top. Journalist is like, wait a second. You stepped over somebody dying so that you could reach the summit? She said, oh yeah, we all did. And he's like, tell me more about this. Oh, this man, he sat up. I thought he looked right at me and said, help. But I was with all these other people, and we all chose to continue to go to the summit, and we left this man to die. And this, for her, was a disappointing aspect of going to the summit. If you were her parent, what would you think about that? If your daughter made the choice to step over somebody dying, to put their goal was so critically important that they were willing to let somebody else die so they can get a picture of themselves, along with all those other people on the top of Mount Everest, what would you think of her? Her dad was with her. Her dad also stepped over this dying person. So where did she get her value systems from? Well, Everest is still an absolutely amazing place. It is truly an iconic achievement to get to the top. If you ever have a chance to go there, you should, because the view from the top is absolutely spectacular. You could see out 1,800 miles, maybe 2,000 miles. You could literally see the curvature of the earth, and you could see layers of atmosphere piling on top of each other. And I remember being on the summit at 10 o'clock in the morning, looking straight up, and I could see stars twinkling. The sky was violet, and there were stars twinkling, and I felt more like I was on the bottom of space than on the top of the world. And that was the adventure experience I was hoping to get out of Mount Everest, was to see the bottom of space at 10 o'clock in the morning, to be in such a wilderness experience that the best in me was going to come out. Well, when I left Everest, I decided to turn my attention to a different mountain, a peak called K2. Has anybody here ever climbed K2? Your mothers are very happy that you're so smart. Obviously, this is a terribly stupid idea to ever think you should climb K2. The death-to-summit ratio on Everest is now about 2%. The death-to-summit ratio on K2 is about 33%. There's been 355 summits. There's been over 155 people that have died. Every season, it seems like somebody dies. Most seasons, nobody can get to the top. Like, if you're going to go there, who do you want to go to the most dangerous peak in the world with? I hope you're going to answer people that have the tools, right? They know how to use these tools well. They have the right techniques. But also they have the behaviors that you need. Because if you're going to be in a life and death situation, you want to share that life and death experience with somebody that you can trust. So the two partners I chose to climb with, this is a guy named Don Bowie. He's a mountain rescue expert. This is a guy named Bruce Norman. Bruce Norman is actually from Scotland, but he's the smartest person I've ever met. He has a PhD in theoretical physics. He speaks 9 languages, all the easy ones like Chinese, or various Chinese dialects. He actually teaches theoretical physics in Beijing. He speaks Russian, he speaks Czech, he speaks Korean, and he speaks it all with a Scottish accent, so nobody understands a damn word he's ever said. So, but these are my climbing partners. We have a guy at base camp named Joel who's going to make sure that we get weather forecasts, that kind of stuff that we're going to need when we're high on the mountain. When you climb K2, you arrive after walking for 85 miles. You arrive to a base camp that's at 17,200 feet, and you're literally camped upon a piece of ice that's over 500 feet deep, a gigantic glacier that's constantly moving as you're sitting there. From there, you have to climb 11,200 feet to get to the summit of the peak. You have to go to work every single day, especially for us because we were a light team. We were 3 people. We did not have the help of Sherpas. We didn't have bottled oxygen. In fact, we were terribly under-resourced in terms of cash and the supplies that you would buy with cash. But we were determined to get to the top anyway, and the only thing that we knew that we had over other people was our willingness to work hard. So we went to work every single day. We had to move 2,000 pounds of equipment from base camp to Camp 1, 1,500 pounds to Camp 2, 1,000 pounds to Camp 3, 500 pounds to Camp 4, and eventually, get ourselves to the top. You had to go to work with a 35-pound backpack on every single day. It didn't matter if the wind was blowing. It didn't matter if it was 40 below zero. You'd crawl into a tent. You'd wake up the next morning. You'd go back to work. Eventually, we climbed up to 25,500 feet, and we got to a point where the snow was so deep that we physically could barely move. We could go about 100 feet an hour, and we were about 3,000 feet from the summit. We knew there was no way to spread this 30-hour work task between just 3 people. So in defeat, we descend off the side of the mountain. We are pouting, of course, because we failed miserably. We get back to base camp, and base camp is starting to fill up with other teams. There's a strong Russian team. 8 of the biggest dudes I've ever seen. I mean, literally, they look like the front line from the NFL. They had this one guy named Roman who had all of his teeth taken out at 30 years old and replaced with these golden crowns. So when he smiled, I don't think he ever smiled, when he ever opened his mouth, he looked like the Jaws character from the James Bond movie, right? So you have his team. There was a Korean team, 15 Korean climbers and 5 Nepali Sherpas. They were paying the senior Sherpa, the Sirdar of the expedition, $25 a day to guide them to the summit of K2. If you come from Nepal, $25 a day is actually a lot of money, right? So it's the 5th poorest country in the world, average annual salary of $300. So in about 12 days, he's going to make a year's salary. And this expedition is probably going to last for 80 days. This dude is in the money. He has a wife and 3 children at home. He is going to bring a lot of cash back to him. He has an amazing resume. He's been to the summit of Mount Everest 6 times. So they hired a great guy to guide him to the top. His name is Nima Nuru Sherpa. There is 4 Italian men. They are filming their expedition for Italian TV. They are the best looking men I've ever seen in mountaineering. Every day, instead of going climbing, they're brushing their hair. They made amazing cappuccinos, so I'd come by and visit them whenever I was in base camp. They would ask us questions about how tough it was up there. Can we please borrow some footage? We have nothing for the internet, So there is 2 Portuguese climbers, including one guy who's the greatest climber in the world if you read his book. It says it on multiple pages, page 1887, etc., about how brave and stronger he is than everybody else. And there's a lone Iranian climber who looks like I know he took a bus from Tehran to Islamabad and hitchhiked his way to base camp. And he looks like he stopped at a yard sale in Sugar Bottom or something like that, as somebody used down jacket and used climbing boots, etc. But he's determined to get to the summit of K2. So we get together with all these expeditions, their leaders especially. And have you guys ever been in one of those meetings where everybody sits in a circle and everyone has to say the politically correct thing no matter what? Well, we get everybody in a circle, and what we want everybody to acknowledge is that we can no longer compete against each other. Up to this point, it would have been so cool if you were the Korean team and the Russian team had failed and the American team had failed, but your team had gotten to the summit. And it would have been even better if you were the lone Iranian and you got to the summit while the Americans failed and the Koreans failed and the Russians failed. So up to this point, everyone has been competing against each other. No one has been willing to cooperate. And we know, because it's so difficult from Camp 3 up, that if we don't cooperate, there's no way anybody will have success. So sitting in that circle, everyone's looking at each other, and they're like, okay, we'll cooperate if that's what we have to do. We're like, good, here's the plan. If 25 of us leave base camp at the same time, we all travel to Camp 1. We've left the mountain. The snow is filled in the trail again. We've got to remake the trail. This is going to be brutal work. We're going to have attrition. Weak people are going to fall off this team, right? They're going to go back down having been defeated. So if 25 of us leave base camp, maybe 20 make it to Camp 1, maybe 15 make it to Camp 2, maybe a dozen make it to highest camp, and maybe one person makes the summit. Are you willing to work to get somebody from another team to the summit? And in that little circle with everybody looking at each other, they have to say yes. So we will all leave together. We've got these expensive weather forecasts. We'll get a good weather forecast. They'll tell us what they get to the summit. 3 days before we're going to go to the summit, or 4 days before the summit, we'll all leave. So here we are leaving to go back up the mountain.
All right, ready to get our butts whooped again?
Yep, ready to step on the beast.
Here we go, is the first step. Pretty nice up there, huh?
Yeah.
As you'll quickly notice, there are no Russians in this film. There's no Iranian. There's no Portuguese.
Well, here we are, back on our way up K2. We're below Camp 1. And sure enough, it's snowing and blowing on us again. This mountain loves to torture us. Certainly never given us the easy way out.
So the day we left to go to Camp 1, everybody else rolled over and went back to bed.
Beautiful Camp 1 again. God.
We got up this morning, and when we looked up onto the Black Pyramid towards Camp 2, there was just number of clouds ripping across the face. We were alone, there was no one else with us, and so we kind of talked to each other, and we all decided, let's just go for it.
This is the funnel right here. This is probably the worst place to be in conditions like this. We can only go through this section one at a time. It's just too dangerous. It's definitely the coldest, hardest day so far. We're going up to Camp 3.
Here we are at 22,000 feet, and the weather's just not cooperating at all. Don is doing a great job of breaking trail for us. Days like this really fill you with doubt. Snow conditions are just horrendous. And looked like the wind died about an hour and a half ago. It's one of those days when you wish you took up golf instead of mountaineering. Alright, we'll just find Camp 3 somehow. And then probably 4 hours before we're ready to roll in our sleeping bags over.
We're at Camp 3. I'll tell you, it took us about 2.5 hours to ascend that last 100 meters or so. Without exaggeration, you couldn't touch bottom. And but we did get here. We were all comfortable. We're boiling water, and we'll head for Camp 4 tomorrow.
If you guys ever get a chance to see the Italian television show, which is absolutely riveting, there's a scene where they're inside their camp, at their tent at Camp 1, and they're on the radio reaching the guys at base camp, and the wind is literally blowing the tent from side to side. And the guy says, "Yes, it's impossible to go anywhere." And the producer in base camp goes, "Yes, but the Americans have just made Camp 3. And so people are desperate to catch up. We are now back at 25,500 feet. Again, this is where the snow is waist deep, where we got stopped before, but we are not going to stop no matter what. We're going to give it everything we have, because we do know this is our last chance to make this thing happen. So we get out that next morning, and you guys have experienced this in a plane, right? You've been in a blizzard, and then you fly above the clouds, and suddenly the sun is shining. Well, this is what's happened to us on K2. We're 25,000 feet. Below us, the storm is still raging. Everyone's trying to come and catch up to us, but it's a sign that the weather is clearing, so we're full of hope. We go out with these massive backpacks on. We have 3,000 feet of rope that we're going to need to secure the way to the top and get back down again. We have our tents, we got our stoves, we got all this other stuff. And in that deep snow, we're only able to go about 100 feet an hour. At about noon, we look down, you can see barely down there, these little dots in the bottom corner of the picture, but that's tents that are popping up at Camp 3. The Russians have arrived, the Portuguese have arrived, the Italians have arrived. They get there, they put their tents up, and two of the climbers, the two Portuguese, including the greatest climber in the world, catches up to us. And they're like, "You guys are going so slow, can you hurry up and make the trail? Like, you know, we got places to go." And we're like, "Well, why don't you help? In fact, it's 11,200 feet from the bottom to the top of the mountain. Can you please, go first for a couple of feet?" And so the brave, Portuguese climber gets out there, and he goes 10 feet, and he turns around and he goes, "This is impossible." And he's right. So we put up our tents, Camp 3.5, right? The next morning, enough people show up. we now have a little train going. There's 25 people up there, 10 of us are out front. Everybody goes 10 steps aside. The next guy goes 10 steps aside. 100 feet later, you're out in the front again, and we get to the site of Camp 4. This is at 26,000 feet. This is what they call the death zone. And it looks awesome, doesn't it? Look, we're in light fleece jackets, not even wearing gloves in the death zone. We put up our tent. We have all his gear. We had a plan. Let's try to get this plan to be executed. We go to the strong Korean team. Of the 15 climbers, 5 have made it to high camp. Of the 5 Sherpas, all 5 are there. 10 climbers, they all have bottled oxygen. The plan is they will take the first 1,000 feet of rope. They will extend it from this tent to where they run out of rope. We'll take the second 1,000 feet of rope, which will take us up through that blacky rock section. It's the most difficult part of Summit Day, so we'll take that responsibility. After we run out of rope, the strong Russians, 4 of 8 of which, also using bottled oxygen, have made it to high camp. They'll take the last 1,000 feet, which will get us to the summit. We go to the brave Portuguese and the beautiful Italians and the lone Iranian, and we say, do us a favor. Stay in bed, right? Wake up after we've put the steps in place. Wake up after the ropes are in place. Then you guys can race to the summit, get your picture on the top without having taken any risks, and then you can race back down and you can go back to your home as a hero. And they think this is a tremendous plan. So here we are leaving for the summit.
Weather conditions are excellent, and we're going to start heading out. So we'll call you about 2 hours south of Bottleneck, over.
Okay, you have a good trip, over.
Yeah, over now. I don't know if you can see anything up there. A couple of lights. They're in the Bottleneck. Don, some Koreans, some Russians.
He said that the Koreans, it seemed, were going to head out at 11, and that they were going to head out at 12, but it sounded like everybody's backed up, so they're about an hour and 20 behind where they thought they were, but it sounds like they're rearing to go. So the night and the summit push has begun.
Pretty dramatic so far. The Korean team was ahead of us. They were all on oxygen, and one of their Sherpas fell down the south face to his death. And I don't think we'll ever find his body. It's gonna be interesting to see what happens.
You guys catch that? So it's dawn. It's maybe a couple of minutes after the sun has come above the horizon. So it's really just a few minutes before this picture was taken. And everybody's spread out. And there's a Sherpa working for the Korean team, and he's going out and laying the rope out as he goes, putting anchors in and laying some more rope out, putting anchors in. And then his Sherpa buddies are following behind him. And the leader of the expedition, the man who had been to the summit of Mount Everest 6 different times, he has a harness on, he's got carabiners, but he chooses not to clip into the rope. And as he's climbing up on a slope that doesn't seem any harder than an intermediate level ski slope, somehow he slips. He has an ice axe that he does not use to stop himself. He tumbles off to the left side of this picture, and his body goes shooting off the side of K2, and he falls for 8,000 to 10,000 feet. When you watch somebody fall, especially somebody that you've just spent 2 of your months of your life with, this is a horribly devastating thing, of course, right? And the people on his team were even more devastated, and the person who was probably most devastated was the Sherpa at the very top. He was a young Sherpa. This was his mentor he just saw fall to his death. He was so overcome by fear that he literally could not remember how to tie the knot into the snow stake to anchor the ropes, to secure the rope so that he could safely descend. So he's up at the very top, and he's starting to yell for help. Everybody else has fallen to the ground, as you can see. They've all stopped in small groups or by themselves. Everybody racing through their mind is one little challenge or one problem, and that's really the problem of how do I come up with an excuse to turn around right now? Because we know that when you go to the summit of K2, that for every 7 people that will reach the summit, 1 person will die. And on this particular day, with 20 of us going to the top, we've witnessed the first death, but statistically there should be 2 more. And you, of course, think that you will be next. So everybody is going through some kind of an existential challenge as they're laying on the snow there, trying to figure out what to do. Can I turn around? Should I turn around? Or should I continue to go up? And I hear the top Sherpa starting to yell, help, help, help. And my only job at that point is to help this man. So I leave the group that I'm with, I climb up to him, I get to the end of the rope, I secure it with a knot to an anchor, and he's now able to safely descend. And as I've been climbing up, I'm looking around, and if you could see in this picture, it is the perfect summit day on K2. There's not a breath of wind. It is warm, right? There's no clouds in the sky. It is the day, if there's ever been a day, to try to push your luck a little bit. I have 600 feet of rope in my pack. So this is where Nima has fallen from. He's fallen down that sunny face there. I take the rope until I run out of it, which is up at the rock bands where things start to get really interesting. I call down to my partners. I'm like, all right, you guys, you ready to continue to come up? They're like, yes. I'm like, what we need right now are two things. We need more rope, and we need that Russian dude Roman with the golden teeth. Send Roman now. So Bruce finds Roman amongst all these people. He sends him up. And Roman comes storming up, and he's breathing bottled oxygen, so he sounds like Darth Vader. And I tie a piece of rope on him, like, okay, go, Roman, go. So Roman takes the rope around the corner, which makes it possible for the rest of us to go to the top. So here we are, heading up our top section. These are the Russians with me right now.
Base camp, base camp.
Base camp copy, over.
The slope that they're on right now, you know, the famed 45 or 55 or 65 degree bottleneck traverse slope is in fact freaking steep. And you can see it from here, and Chris is on it right now, or at the black base of it anyways.
Unbelievable. Considering how hard we've been working, this is a big mountain.
Hey, base camp, can you read me, over?
Yes, loud and clear, Chris.
Okay, we're turning the corner on the traverse.
Yeah, we got another maybe 350 to go.
Here comes down the summit of K2. Awesome job, Don.
The whole base camp, you hear just applause erupting in every different camp, and we're all so excited for you. Over.
Very, very hard summit in these conditions. We either had knee-deep snow or bulletproof ice.
Oh, that's one of the hardest summits I've ever had. Oh, yeah? I think I only specialize in hard ones.
We left out one, so that's 15 and a half hours, the summit.
Oh.
I think I just pray that we can make it back safely. There's a long way before we hit the fixed lines, over.
So you guys, we're on the summit of K2 at 4:30 in the afternoon. When I guided Mount Everest, we had a rule. If you're on the summit by 11 o'clock in the morning, you had to turn around no matter where you were. The reason we had that rule was because you could only carry back then 18 hours worth of oxygen. So if you used 12 hours to get to the top, you only have 6 hours to get yourself back down again. And as we know, most people die on the descent. So here we are, incredibly late in the day. We have a tremendously long descent ahead of us. We knew going into it that the average summit day on K2 was 22 hours, so we were expecting a long, hard day. But here we are on the top of the most dangerous mountain in the world, and we still have this descent ahead of us. We look around, and we are not alone on the top. There is the leader of the Italian expedition, Daniele Nardi. Daniele, where are your climbing partners? Oh, I don't know, Chris. You know, they're not as strong as I am. 4 of us have left high camp, but I am the only Italian to reach the top. Take my picture. Filming for Italian television. I'm like, wait a second, Daniele. Do you know where your 3 members are? And he's like, no, we don't talk to each other. We actually have never liked each other, you know, but it doesn't matter because I've reached the summit of K2. So I take his picture. I film him for Italian television. He seems completely unconcerned where his teammates are. In fact, he might be even more ecstatic that he's succeeded and they've failed. He's not the only one on the top that needs some explaining. This guy in the middle shows up. We're like, who are you? I am Libor from Czech Expedition. Where did you come from? Oh, my 5 friends and I came from the other side of the mountain. In the middle of the night, we saw your lights. We traversed the peak. We got in your trail. We followed your trail to the summit. Along the way, my 4 friends have been overcome by exhaustion. And I am the only one to persevere. I've reached the summit of K2, and you know what? I feel like crap. I think I'm going to vomit. You have to help me get back down alive. And so now we've been given the gift of a weak check climber on the summit of K2. And in the back, between Daniel's legs there, you see one guy squatted down on the ground in a red jacket. It's the lone Iranian climber has shown up. The strong teams, the 4 Russians who made the top, a handful of Koreans and some of their Sherpas make the top. The Portuguese climbers make the top. They tag the summit. They get their picture for Facebook or Match.com. They race off the summit as fast as they possibly can. Now, when we guided Everest, the rule was, and the rule in all of mountaineering is the same, the guide is always the last one to leave the top. In fact, you always want the guide uphill at all times because it is very quick to descend to a problem. It is very difficult to climb to a problem. So if I have a problem with a client and he's 100 feet below me, I can descend to him in a minute or two, start getting him CPR, do whatever has to happen. But if he's 100 feet above me, it might take me 10 or 15 minutes to get there, at which point he's stopped breathing and he's dead. And then I got to explain it to his mother, and it's a big problem. So the guide is always the last to leave the summit. We gather all these misfit toys. We lead them towards the ropes. We start the descent of K2. It is now freezing cold because we're entering the shadowed side of the mountain. The temperature has gone from 20 above to 20 below. It's headed towards 40 below zero. As we're descending into the shadow of the mountain, we run into 2 Italians still coming up. The Italian leader races past them, never stops to talk to them. This is one of them at 9 o'clock in the morning. So clearly at 9 o'clock in the morning, he is overcome by exhaustion, and he should have turned around at 9 o'clock in the morning. Now it's 5 o'clock and he's still going to the top. These are the base camp producers, and they're just learning that the leader has reached the summit of K2. A gigantic celebration. They now have a television show. Here's our film of Daniele walking across the top. Now the guys in base camp are asking the same questions. Where are the other 3 climbers? One of them, we find out later, has turned around at about 11 o'clock in the morning, sitting in camp at Camp 4 in the tent. But they keep calling. Nobody answers the radio calls. They finally change their frequency over to our radio.
We've seen Mario. He's behind us, but nothing happened. Daniele is the only person who doesn't seem to be concerned about him.
Non ho capito bene, però
Located. Over.
Mario rispetto a
very
loro
good. We
era
copy that.
15 minuti, 30 minuti in ritardo.
Man, where's Mario?
You are with Mario?
Yes.
Where?
Mario's going to the summit.
He's going to the summit? You are... How many times?
Maybe 1 hour. Stefano's with him.
Stefano con Mario.
Even if he's close to the top, it's not too late. That becomes dangerous.
Yes. Really dangerous.
Mario, campo base basso.
At 5:30 at night, they get the first call back from one of the climbers. And it's Mario who says, I've reached the summit of K2. And then he tells them that Stefano has also reached the top.
Mario, sei un adorabile pazzo, è tardissimo.
And they say to him, descend as fast as you can.
C'è Claudio che è scoppiato a piangere, passo. Me lo fai morire questo ragazzo qua. Mario, passo.
Well, the descent stretches into the night. We have the Czech climber with us. We have the Iranian climber. The Italian climber kind of zooms ahead. We get to the end of the rope. We're now able to walk. It's about, I don't know, an hour's walk from there to our tents. And at the edge of the rope, the Czech climber falls down. We flip him over, and he looks up at us, and he says in English, I'm dying, I'm dying. And we're like, dude, you're not going to die in our watch. We are absolutely going to get you somewhere alive. We do not know where his tent is. We don't know where his 4 climbing partners are. So we have no choice but to drag him back to our camp. We have a 3-person tent with 3 sleeping bags that will now be shared by 4 people. We'll make it work for the night. We drag them back. It takes about 10 minutes for one person to get into the tent. It's so cold. You sit down, you take your crampons off. Every day, this is the 85th day of this expedition. So for 85 days, we've been taking our crampons, stacking them one on top of each other inside the vestibule of the tent. So Don gets in first. He's our paramedic. We need to start prepping the drugs to be able to pump into this check climber. He gets his crampons off. We get Libor's crampons off his feet. We slide him in. We put him inside of his sleeping bag. I have 20 more minutes of standing around. So I walk around to the Russian tent. Are you guys okay? Yes, we're okay, Chris. Go to the Koreans. Are you guys okay? Yes, we're a little bit sad that somebody died, but we reached the top. I go to the Italian tent. I'm like, Daniele, what the hell is going on? He's laying in the tent with their 4th climber. And I'm like, are you guys even aware of where your teammates are? And they're like, no, we don't, we're not talking to them, So we look up on the mountain and we see their lights together, the 2 remaining Italians. It's 9:30 at night. We know that they're no more than 3 hours away from us. Daniele, if they're not back in the tent by 12:30, start yelling help. We will go out and rescue them. At 11 o'clock at night, Mario starts to call in to get directions. At 1 o'clock in the morning, he stumbles into the tent. Where's Stefano? Oh, I don't know, Daniele. I think he's right behind me. Don't worry about him. He'll be okay. Go back to sleep. They fall asleep. Stefano never returns to the tent. 7:30 in the morning, a raging blizzard has come to K2. We were all fighting for our lives to get out of there. The Russians, the Koreans, the Portuguese teams team up. It's snowing a couple of inches an hour. The trail from Camp 3 to Camp 4 is already filled in with blowing snow. They leave. Leaving behind them by about 10 minutes is the lone Iranian and 3 Italians. They get lost. They come back up to the tent and are now outside of our tent screaming at us. Meantime, we got this whacked out Czech dude who looks like he's seen God and he's on some kind of a heroin binge. And we're like trying to get him dressed. We're trying to help him pee in a bottle. We're trying to help him do all this stuff so we can get out of there. And outside of our tent, screaming and yelling at us are the Italians saying, you must leave now. If you don't leave right now, you too will die just like Stefano. And at 8 o'clock in the morning, we find out that Stefano has never returned back to camp. We have to make a decision. Do we go look for him, or do we help these other people get back down? And we go through this little moral dilemma for about 10 minutes, and we decide that the chances of finding this man are about 0, and the chances of these other people dying without our help is about 100%. So we make the choice to descend. As we start to strap on our crampons, we realize that of the 4 pairs of crampons that were in the vestibule that night, there's only 3 pairs there. The top pair has been stolen by one of the other teams that didn't have the same sense of discipline that we did. Don decides that he will go down without crampons, which is not a death sentence. It's just like going, we've all, walked down a black diamond slope at some point in our lives. You just don't ever want to hit a patch of ice. Just outside of Camp 3, Don hits a patch of ice. His feet go shooting up from him. He tumbles down. When he tries to stand back up again at Camp 3, he realizes that his leg is broken. So we now have a man with a broken leg. We have this whacked out Czech climber, and our descent becomes a lot more complicated. The Russians, the Portuguese, the Koreans have left at breakfast, and they get back to base camp for dinner. It takes us 3.5 days to get back to base camp. Well, eventually we come off the mountain. We're able to fly the injured out. And it's time to start to have one of those after-action reviews, a little bit of a meeting between the teams. Some of us want to go and beat the living nonsense out of a couple of Italians, right? Before we do this, we want to look at what our goals were before we sit down and have this meeting. And we had 3 goals. Our first goal was to come home alive. Our second goal was to climb to the summit together. We actually knew that if we summited together, we stood a greater chance of coming home alive. And lastly, we wanted to climb the mountain in a style that we would be proud of forever. What about this man? What were his goals? Probably just to get to the summit. Hopefully to get a picture of himself on the summit. Hopefully get a little bit of film. Hopefully allow that film to be spread across Italy so that the whole world or all of Italy knew how great of a climber he was. But do you think that he is proud of the style that he climbed K2 in? In fact, he goes home And he goes to the Zafka family, whose son is now dead, and he spends only 15 minutes with that family helping them grieve, which I'm sure is not enough. Well, when we look at Daniele as a leader, we realize that he brought with him all the tools he needed to get to the top. He had great climbing techniques. In fact, he's a much better climber than I was. And he did get some results. In fact, he got 3 climbers to the summit just like we did. The only thing is there was a little bit of difference, of course, was with the death. We didn't kill anybody. Well, the difference that I think we brought was behaviors. We focused as much in our behaviors on this expedition as we did on making sure we had the right crampons, we were using the right weather forecast or whatever it happened to be. And I think that's what allowed for a higher level of results. We all are working with teams. We are all working with teams in a competitive environment. And I will tell you from my experience, and I'm sure from your experience too, that it's the behaviors that our teams bring to the task that is the true determinant of our success. In fact, there's a study done by the professors at Harvard that say you could predict somebody's success rate in business based upon a few things. Their tools they bring, their intellect, right? Their education, their techniques, their business skills. What do they know about, financing or whatever it happens to be? And lastly, their attitude. And if you have the right tools and right techniques, we can predict your level of future success by 25%. 75% of your success is based upon the behaviors that you bring to your job. And it's the same thing that's true in your team. If you evaluate Daniele, or if you evaluate the members of your team, whether you know it or not, you do this all subconsciously at least based upon 2 axes. Does this person produce strategic results? And are they aligned with our core values? All of us at some point have worked with people who don't get stuff done, and they're terrible people to spend time with, right? Those are the people in our red box. They don't produce results, nor are they aligned with our core values. Sadly, too much of us spend time working with people in the yellow boxes. Look at the people that are aligned to our core values. We love these people. They're the nicest people we know. They just don't get anything done at work. What about the other people? They get a lot of stuff done at work, but they piss everybody off. Those 2 groups of people hold us hostage. At this point in our career, and at this point in this economy, we cannot afford to have anything but green people on our team. You deserve to work with people that deliver strategic results consistently, and they are aligned with their core values. Those people are a lot more fun to work with, and those teams make a lot more money. What about these people? What about the duds? Does anybody here have a dud on your team? And we call him a dud because he has dangerous, unproductive, and dysfunctional behaviors. Anybody here have somebody on their team that's dangerous, unproductive, or dysfunctional, or any other 3-letter word that you want to call this person, right? What's the cost of these people? We know that teams that have these people perform 30 to 40% worse than teams without them. So you want to perform 30 to 40% better, get rid of these people. Why do they cost us so much money? Is because the good people want to get out of there. They can't stand working with these duds, and so they go and work for your competitor, right, where they don't have to deal with this problem. Everybody loses performance. You as a leader are spending too much time dealing with people's petty dramas and not enough time dealing with the dramatic opportunities that exist out there for your company. And lastly, we do not give our managers the tools they need to get rid of these people or to manage these people. Can we get better performance out of people? Yes, most people we can. But believe it or not, there are people that are pathologically just messed up. And the best thing we could ever do is have them work for our competitors if we want to make money. Look at these statistics. 30% of American employees do a great job. 50% of people just sit around waiting to get a paycheck and hopefully not to be noticed. And 20% of the people are actively sabotaging your company. What does this cost the American economy? Who's got $500 billion just as waste like this? We certainly don't on our scale with our smaller companies. We do not need to be having these human behaviors killing people on our team. I wrote a whole book, it's got pictures in case you guys like that kind of stuff, about what causes teams to fail. And then I decided this is too depressing. I don't want to work with teams that are filled with dysfunctional people. I want to work with great teams. So in the last bunch of years, all I do now, as I said, is I work with either people that are in existential crisis or teams that are trying to go from 99.9% excellent to 100% excellent. Those teams are fascinating. In fact, the group I work with at Wharton, this is the group that we focus on most of the time. And we find that these people, look how much more important they are, how much more profitable they are to your company. High performance teams, what are they? They're the teams we want to be part of, right? Because look at this, they have a superior performance. They make more money. They have a distinctive impact on the societies and the towns they live in, and they endure. So after we pass away, especially those older people in the group, we've left behind a legacy we can be proud of. There are 4 characteristics to every high-performance team, and I hope you have these characteristics inside yourself. If you have children, we need to build these characteristics inside of them so they can be as successful as we would love them to be. Number 1, high-performance teams are made up of people that put the mission of the organization ahead of their personal goals. Selfishness has no place in our workplaces, right? And as leaders, this is critically important because the more comfortable we get at the top, the more likely we are to put our personal desires ahead of the group's goals, and then we are found to be a fraud. Great teams are led by people that are passionate and humble. Why is passion so important? Because we know emotional factors are where all of the increase in productivity comes from. Look at this. How can you motivate somebody? There's only so many levers. They're either internally motivated or externally motivated. You can motivate them by pain or pleasure. If we want to try to get you to do more work, do we have to beat you or pay you more to get you to do work? How come you just can't be internally motivated? If we have passionate people, they are the people who will be internally motivated, so we don't have to give them the motivation externally. Vision. Listen, your folks are dependent upon you providing them a vision about where you're going. You know what the number 1 thing is that people look for in their leader? Is this ability to be forward-looking, this ability to be visionary. If you're not telling people where to go, they cannot help you get there. It is so critically important that it might just be the greatest reason why teams fail because nobody ever told them where to go. Partnership. The 2 most important words in any partnership are trust and caring. Ask anybody who has a broken heart if this is not true, right? If you lose trust, and look at this, people, there's a trust deficit among the leadership in America. If you're just a trustworthy boss, your team is going to do a lot better than other teams. In fact, look at that. How people care about each other is the greatest predictor of their future achievement. Perseverance. Everybody in this room I know works hard, but do you work smart? Do you just go and put out the same fires time and time again? The only way we're going to get better, and this is the way it's done with all high-performance teams, is they practice and reflect. It's that situation or that coming together and debriefing the experience that really matters if we're going to boost productivity. So if I told you you could do one thing and increase your productivity by 20 to 25%, would you do it? Especially if that bottom line falls into your pocket, of course you would. And what do you talk about when you meet with these groups? Did we bring the right tools to the challenge? Did we bring the right business techniques to the challenge? Because absolutely, sometimes we fail because we brought the wrong tool. We financed the project in the wrong way. Our marketing strategy sucked, whatever it is. But most importantly, did we bring the right behaviors? And especially for those of us who are under-resourced, behaviors becomes more critical as a factor of our future success. We deserve to be on one of those green teams. You have earned it. You have brought, I am sure, your passion to this work. I'm sure you have a vision for where you want to take your organization. I am sure that you're an excellent partner. You trust people, you're trustworthy, you care about people, and lastly, you're good, you work hard and smart. Those are the keys to getting everybody to the summit. I wish you all the luck in every endeavor you happen to be. I know that when you get to the top, just like my experience on the summit of Mount Everest, the view will be worth it. It'll feel so good to be able to be with the people that you love and care about, that you've worked hard with, and that you look off into the distance and you see that curvature of the earth, and you see the stars twinkling at 10 o'clock in the morning. That's the kind of accomplishment that all of us deserve. And we all in this room know that it's truly partnerships that trump accomplishments. It's through building great partnerships that we're able to accomplish things time and time again, bigger and bigger challenges. I wish you guys all the luck in taking your company or your organization to the level that you want it to be. Clearly, people need you to be successful. Not only the teammates, the people that entrusted you by working for you, but also the customers that need to come here, because when all of us, one of us benefits, obviously we're all benefiting. Good luck. Congratulations to you guys for all the successes you've already had.